Hello, and welcome back to the Mediocre Marketer. I'm your host, Whitney Cowell. Joining me today is Cassie Quien, VP of Commercial at REPOWR. Welcome, Cassie.
Hey, Whitney. Thank you for having me. Great to see you again.
It's great to see you. So I would love to just kick off this episode with learning a little bit about where you're at because you're in somewhat of a new role right now.
I am. Yes, I have transitioned over the last, call it 5 months. I'm almost going on 6, out of actually being involved in moving freight, which has been a huge change over the last 10 years for me. I'm still in the industry, but at a freight tech company, if you will, called REPOWR. So you're familiar with them, right, in Chattanooga.
Mhm.
But I've stepped into a role here to lead our commercial sales team. So that's really involved with all of REPOWR's existing users, existing partners, working on some new segments of our business that we're growing, and then a lot of our commercial partnerships that we have. So it's been a huge change for me, just in terms of like what I'm dealing with day to day and being immersed really in the product and how quickly that side can move as compared to moving freight and having direct conversations with shippers like I used to.
So I have a really big question about all of this because it is, like you said, it's a huge transition when you go from like service to product.
Yeah.
And now you're diving into the product, everything that it has to offer. And you have to keep in mind sort of the leadership balance between two things, right? Like product and how that impacts your customer base. And also at the sales end is how you're positioning that and how you're taking care of those people. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you're balancing that and how what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and a lot of that, like, I don't necessarily think changes the people part necessarily. There's a huge aspect still, especially at REPOWR. And I guess maybe for those who aren't familiar with who REPOWR is, what we do, I'll just give a quick, like, little plug there. We've created a universal trailer network for shared trailer capacity out in the industry, and I think it's just been a large gap where you've got all of these large national carriers, private fleets that have a ton of trailers that they have in their network, and they haven't really had an opportunity historically to easily share that capacity with the owner operators, smaller fleets, and brokerages of the world. So we're connecting those two together, allowing those who need trailers to not have to take on the capital to have access to them, while allowing our large supplier partners to monetize their equipment. So, quick little plug, just so it makes sense when I'm saying the product, what we're doing is
Right.
this marketplace for shared trailer capacity. But back to your question, on balancing kind of what we're building and then the people aspect. I think that's huge in any startup, and it has to be such a big focus both on your internal team and then also the external partners of as you're building this brand
Right.
awareness. You kind of have to keep both in flow, both in play, because you're often asking people to wear a lot of different hats, just depending on the size of the team and the business that you're growing. So I think like a huge part there is just making sure that you're always like checking in on your team, understanding who needs support, pulling in who's the expert, though it might not be what their day-to-day job is. Like there's
Right.
a lot to juggle throughout all of that.
Right. And I think it's really important, like you said, checking in on your people because wearing a lot of different hats, it's not for everybody. It is the startup world is fast and exhausting and
Yeah,
unpredictable.
and
And
fun.
it's incredibly fun. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I would recommend everybody do that at least once. Just like I would recommend if you could, every person should experience like a very hyper corporate work
Yes.
environment just to really understand your spectrums. Uh,
Yeah.
but I think especially people that have not done anything in like a startup environment before, helping them learn how to like throttle their efforts and
Yeah.
make sure that they're like very balanced so that they are able to show up to the best of their abilities as their best self while also producing high quality work because it is a true balancing act.
Yeah, it can move very fast. And you have to be, like, open-minded and nimble to that change. I
Mhm.
think even if there are, scenarios or strategies or opportunities that you might not fully align with. Like being in a startup, I think you have to be someone who's willing to try it, get on that ship and just be like, let's do it. And if it fails, we'll pivot. And you have those plans B, C, D, with how, how we position ourselves to customers, or how we're pitching to get new users, speaking from like the sales side, or even the different partnerships that we go after. Like a lot of it, you've got to be open to put yourself out there, put the
Mhm.
company, the brand,
Right.
and what we're building, and be nimble. Otherwise, like people struggle if you don't have that type of
Yeah.
like agility.
Yeah. And I think what you touched on right there as far as, like, having a plan is incredibly important, and I think sometimes, like, a missed opportunity that I have seen, and one that's not that tough to fix because there are different avenues you can take of what is that plan like B, C, D, and
Yeah.
then the opportunities that you were talking about as well, and I don't know that that sits on one person's shoulders, but being able to have the discovery of what can we offer a person to get the best experiences and exposure to do really well in their role, whether
Yes.
that's like internal or external.
Yep. I think that exposure is a that I it's a good word that you use. Like get someone the exposure to maybe put themselves in an uncomfortable
Mhm.
position, like something that they haven't historically done or been a part of those conversations. I think that's when you kind of find like those aha moments when you pull in someone who maybe like historically this has not been their role, or they didn't come in with this perfect resume of experience. But if you pull them
Right.
into a conversation, that's when you get those like $1 million ideas.
Right, right, and that's I think the beautiful part of a startup is it's a little bit easier to make that happen if
Yes.
you're organized enough. I don't think you have
Yeah.
to be organized to a T. Whereas, like, in the hyper corporate realm, 'cause that's my first experience coming, into the working world,
Yeah.
and you're very siloed, so that exposure is incredibly limited until you reach a certain level, and it takes a very long time to get to that point.
Yes.
Whereas,
Yes.
like, in a startup, you can sit with your developers, you have, different walks that are bringing different networking opportunities, and for us in the supply chain, a lot of that looks like events, very
Yeah.
niche events, and then every once in a while, those, like, really big annual industry events.
Yeah, spot on. I think back to roles I've had that have been in a hyper corporate role or organization, like you're saying, and just the difference there. And you're certainly not. It's just a difference of like how the organization has grown, of course, but like you're not being thrown into, I think, some of those networking opportunities as much because your role is so much more defined,
Right.
and siloed. Whereas again, like in a startup, I think the company needs to put themselves out there, and give those opportunities to people to go to events and help spread the brand awareness too.
Yeah, yeah, and that creates such a good foundation for the business itself, especially, like, I hate saying like in today's, age, but like in the environment that we're in today, I think that brand awareness, both for the company and for the individual matter because it's something like as a
Yeah.
marketer that I always say is like people follow people, not brands.
Yep.
Well, still having that brand is important, but the brand is at this point like made up of the individual. So like yes, the company has their own identity, their mission, their values, their goals, their tone, what, their value that they're putting in the market and what they put into the organization is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
But hiring people that can reflect that and bring their own like personal touch to it, I think is invaluable.
Yep. I totally agree. I think it's interesting to, again, like back to like the startup side of building that brand and having your people be such a big part of it. It's been fun for me to see the different people like through my own network that I can connect with,
Yeah.
and speak to about REPOWR because we really do touch so many different sides of this industry and can support it. And the number of people that you don't realize over the time that you accumulate in your network that you can then lean on, and it is so important. But that's part of kind of that, I don't want to say strategy because like networking and stuff, putting yourself out there's, I mean, I don't see it as like a strategy. It's not my favorite thing. But it's like vitally important today as you're helping build different brands. And I think
Yeah,
you know that probably very well.
and I agree with you. I think there's, like, a time and a place to make it strategic, like, planning for like something that's in person that is like a prospect or a customer that's existing, depending on what you're selling, especially if like a renewal is coming around. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's a really important time to be strategic. But I think you and I, and probably many other people that we know, walking in and meeting people where they're at without looking at them as a dollar sign
Yeah.
is a much better way to build like a true network, instead of saying, "Well, I know these people and I've shaken that hand before," is very different than "I know people that I could send their way and put my stamp of approval
Yes.
for, if they're hiring, if they need a service to be taken care of, or just like to sit down and have somebody like in my corner if I ever need it." Like,
Yeah.
I've experienced times where people have reached out to me and said, "Hey, I know that this person is hiring and I think that you'd be a really great fit if you're interested." And
Yep.
that is not that person looking at me as a dollar sign. Like, that initial interaction was us just meeting as like human beings.
Yeah. Yep. I can share that same sentiment. I think it helps you in just like so many different avenues and I mean, that just kind of comes back to like how you treat people and take care of
Right.
them. Yeah.
Right. And so, like, internally, what does that look like for you? Because I know you and I approach like our networks in very similar ways, which is how
Yeah.
we've come to know each other. But
Yeah.
internally, what does that look like when you're having people kind of separate, like build that relationship versus just being there to do a job and move on?
For sure. Yeah. Um, I think there's just like such an element, and I guess maybe over the last, I don't know, handful of years, I've gotten good at joining an organization. I've had some changes over the last few years, and I think the biggest thing, like as at least as someone new coming in, is to make yourself open,
Mm,
and really like showcase who you are, your personality. You can't take like 6 months to warm up,
right.
to in order to create those relationships quickly, especially if you need to hit the ground running, which has been my experience here with Repower. But
Startup life.
yeah, startup life. But I think like just like that human element, like authenticity, being inherent, like just truthful and honest, and treating people just with like candor and respect. And so like internally, I think the team does a phenomenal job of having an element of like relationships and truly caring about one another, but also absolutely working our asses off to build the company and get things done. So it's like that balance of being friends, but then also like putting the business first.
Yeah. And I think that exactly what you said, of you can't take forever to onboard yourself into the
Yeah.
company culture. Like, you need to I think it's like on the employers, either like the employer, the founder, if you
Yep.
have a recruiter, if you're outsourced, whatever that is like, this is the type of person we're looking for, and
Yeah.
be really specific, and say, I'm also open if they're receptive to like, this is our culture. Like,
Yeah.
this is what we really stand for, and we need to make sure that people are behind that, especially in startup life, because there's either not a lot of you or everybody's running. There's like a handful of you and you're all running in different directions, like at the same time, but you need to overlap.
Yeah. I mean,
So having the same values and understanding, I think that builds like safety and trust as new people are joining the organization.
yeah. Yep. And I think especially as organizations grow, like that can be a challenging thing to fold people into an existing team. So depending on that higher personality and how they come in, how they fit, that is crucial when you're in like early years of building something.
Right. Right. And I think that's especially true when it comes to like bringing in somebody more in like a leadership role
Yeah.
over an existing like person or team.
Yep.
I've seen that go horribly wrong. And I've also seen it just elevate operations across the board in such a great way when it's the right fit. And I
Yeah.
think like that internal communication has happened of like, we're going to be looking for this person. This is what their role is going to be. And then that person kind of comes in and does exactly what you said. They just like embrace the chaos.
Yeah. But
And
also go ahead. I was gonna say, but also like need to like respect kind of what's there, what's been built, what the foundation is, what the relationships are, and be mindful how they are changing that just by being there.
right,
And I
right.
think sometimes like that's sometimes where I think it can get lost. Someone comes in, thinks they've got all of the answers, all of the ideas.
Like a bull.
There's a fine balance of like showing up as yourself, not onboarding yourself for 6 months, like we're saying, but then also like having respect for what's been built and how you fit and how what you are bringing is going to change dynamics.
Right, right. Because nobody wants to be introduced to a bulldozer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It, I'm glad that we're talking about this because I do think it's an opportunity for a lot of organizations because what I've seen as far as like mergers and acquisitions, there's a lot of things that are happening. There are a lot of leaders that are like acquiring teams. There are a
Yeah.
lot of startups that are in like growth sprints right now.
Yep.
And I think it's a very important conversation to have is not only how are you positioning yourself in the market and like training your employees to be aligned with that, but as you're growing, how are we like maintaining that narrative or as
Mhm.
we're blending, how do we approach that narrative in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, spot on. And I think that too, like the how do you grow but also maintain some of like what has made you successful
Right.
as an org. So again, that's where it becomes like just so vital that the people you're adding can kind of mesh in and help you take you to another level of where you want to reach, but also like fit in with what made you where you are like to just from the beginning.
So what did you do in your onboarding to like ease that transition and to like integrate
Yeah.
yourself into the the existing operations?
Yeah. I think mine it might be a little bit unique. I work fully remote for the company, but great majority of the team is in office in Chattanooga.
Yeah.
So I feel like that in itself creates just a different playing field when you have to integrate yourself remotely. I think when you're in person, you're forced to people know you're there. You're in the office. You're walking around. You're sitting by them. You can lean over, ask a question. You can walk down a hallway. So there comes like a different level of onboarding and introducing yourself when you're in a remote environment. And so I think the biggest thing there that people sometimes miss, you have to like spread yourself past the core people that you work with. So like there are certain people that I talk to every single day because we need each other to execute. But then
Mhm.
there are like obviously other team members that if I didn't make an effort or they wouldn't know that I'm even there.
Right.
So I think that has been huge for me and took some learnings from the past that you need to make an effort to just like reach out to everybody in the org. So I try very hard to make those connections, even if we're not necessarily working on the same initiatives. And I
Mhm.
think that has served me well to have a presence like I'm in person without actually physically being there. Um, so
Right.
that's one thing that I like put a lot of emphasis on. And then otherwise, again, like some of this is just learnings as I get older. But like speaking up in meetings or like when the team is connecting and asking questions. And so even if it's a question that like I think I maybe should know, I'll just be like, "Hey, could you just explain like what that is?" Especially like some of this terminology of just different things like on this product side. I'm like, I will just hey, can you go over that again? I don't understand like why we're doing that. Which is just a way I think to show that I'm curious, I'm here to support, learn, I want to be involved. Um, that's all been super helpful. And then just from like my team aspect, again, just like not showing up that I know everything. Absolutely leaning on the people who have built this company
Mhm.
to educate me on what they're doing, why it works, what I could be missing. I don't know. I think it like the just like being fully honest
Yeah.
in the experience, what I'm seeing. I think that's been what I like find most successful with that element of being remote though.
Yeah, I love the idea of coming in and asking questions. As somebody who probably asks more questions than I need to, I like to poke holes and find, answers, and there's, the clarification in, like, doing that. There's clarification of things that you may not know, or like, I think I have a grasp on this, and then you find out later on,
Yeah.
usually in a embarrassing or like not great way. That
Yeah.
you're pretty wrong in what you were assuming. But then that also gives you, like, if especially if you're in a leadership role or like in the
Yep.
startup world, is like other opportunities of gaps that you can help fill in the future. And I think
Yeah.
that really helps with strategic planning.
Mhm.
Um, but it does feel vulnerable to come in and do that. Like, I know a lot of people are not comfortable speaking up and raising
Yeah.
their hand, adding to the conversation. Um, and I think that's why, like, all the way back to the beginning of this episode, talking about it might not always be for like the faint of heart.
Yeah.
But I think it's really good to push yourself if you're uncomfortable in those situations. That can be one of the, like, for some people, it's going to a networking event. For others, it's raising your hand in a four-person meeting with a
Yeah.
question that might make you feel like you should know that, but you don't.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you
Putting yourself out there.
do you know Amy Barnes?
I love Amy
Okay,
Barnes.
so Amy, I got to know Amy over like a little, like probably the last little over a year. I consider her a great friend and mentor, and she really always repeated any of these things that you were just naming off, these things that might be uncomfortable for people,
Right.
is that you have to exercise that muscle to make it something that you're comfortable doing. And that has kind of just stuck with me through anything where I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. And it's like, okay, that's why you have to, because you need to exercise that muscle. So like even I would say a couple of years ago, networking events, conferences, I was uncomfortable.
Right.
Speaking up sometimes when I'm the only remote person and everyone else is in a conference room, I would be uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's a very intimidating situation.
Yeah, until you do it enough, and then it's like, "Nope, this is I'm supposed to be here, I have ideas, I'm gonna have to, like, not know if someone's about to talk, and I'm gonna have to just speak." Um, but that like, I think of that, her sentiment of, you just have to exercise that muscle to get out of you like, to make yourself uncomfortable so it can
Mhm.
become a comfortable
Yeah,
act for you. I think that's
absolutely.
huge.
Shout out to Amy Barnes.
I know, I love her. Hi, Amy. If you watch this, I'll tell you.
She's been, incremental in my path as well, kind of being launched into leadership and not really knowing what I'm doing. So we've partnered up on a project or two. She's been a mentor to me, um, arguably a therapist in a situation or
Yep,
two, where
yep.
it's more of like, I don't know if I need advice or if I just need to calm down.
Okay, yeah, I mean, Amy's been that for me too.
She's wonderful, and I think it's important to have people like that in your network, right? That
Yeah,
was, I think somebody, I don't remember how I ended up coming across her, but I just messaged her and said, "This is really random, but can I talk to you about something? Like, I think I just need a different perspective."
yeah,
And we've maintained that relationship ever since, and that was a big lesson in learning how to ask for help. And like people say, use your resources. That was using my resources, which at that point was a pretty uncomfortable thing for me to do. It felt very foreign.
yeah. I think it's easy for a lot of people, us, anybody to, like, get on something like this podcast and talk about all these wonderful, like, "Do this, you should do this. This is how you succeed," but then to actually
When this is
practice it, like, reaching out to her and saying that she's a stranger to you, an acquaint like, someone through your network, but reaching out that you want to talk and need support on something, that's not easy.
yeah, it's not. And yeah, practicing what we preach, doing it versus talking about it, two
Yeah.
totally different things.
Mhm. I'm with you.
Well, we are kind of coming up on the end of the episode. This flew by.
It did. Yeah,
I
we're going all over the place, but it's good.
I would love to know, any advice that you would have for somebody that is in a startup right now, either like new to the startup world or walking into like a new role at a different startup. Advice that you have after just experiencing it and still kind of walking through the early stages?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing is like, and I think I maybe said some of this earlier, but like you just can't take any of it too seriously. Like you need to take your role seriously, obviously, your work and what you're like the output and what you're providing, but you've got to be willing to pivot and make a change because you're still trying to it's not an established organization that is just kind of running on autopilot. So I think it's so easy to get wrapped up in like if you've got an idea and it you execute and it falls flat, you don't get the results you want. Like you've got to be able to just pick up the next day and be like, all right, we're going to try this now. And I think having that open mind to not be so harsh on yourself or your team members and know that you're kind of in this together, but you've got to be flexible, open-minded, and nimble. And then it's fun. It's really fun. And then when something doesn't go the way you planned it, it's okay because you can adjust it and you've usually got a team of like-minded people that are able to move that quickly with you.
Yeah, that's important. I think when you decide to like put your ego away and kind of fill that energy with
Yeah.
like empathy and compassion for one another, I think
Yep.
there's just like a new energy and it's really contagious in that
Yes.
moment.
Yes. Spot on. Totally agree with you.
Well, this has been a fantastic chat. My final question before you go. So I have a question that I do every season.
Okay.
Last season, it was your biggest mistake in your career. This season's a lot nicer. I am seeking out book recommendations. So either a book that you're reading right now or one that you would highly recommend somebody pick up.
Okay. Let's see. I don't know if you can see the full frame. There's a lot of books behind me.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, you are the same.
My messy book.
Okay. So like a fun one, but okay. The Ride of a Lifetime, by Bob
Oh,
Iger.
okay.
It's his journey through like Disney ABC, but as like business. It's one of my absolute favorite books. The other one, I'm gonna pluck it off the shelf here. This is not like, I mean, this is called 1,000 Little Things Happy Successful People Do. So it's just like little short, like 1,000 different little inspirational things. And I
Love
can
that.
like pick it up and just read a couple. It's not like a book you need to read cover to cover. So those are the two that are on the top of my head just because I opened this one yesterday to look for something in it. So two fun ones. Not necessarily like perfect businessy mindset books, but
Who needs perfect businessy?
I know, but I'm saying like those are just like two random good ones.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate the recommendation. I was just saying on my last episode, like by the time all of these air, like I'm going to be reading until 2026.
I love that. Not a bad thing.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on this episode. It was really great to catch up with you, to learn where you're at, and to
Yeah.
hear some wisdom.
Thanks, Whitney.
All right. And to